Welcome to Capitol View, where we discuss the latest in state government and politics. I'm Hannah Meisel with NPR Illinois. Joining us this week is Dave Dahl with Springfield radio station WTAX. Thanks for joining us, Dave.
Hello, Hannah.
And also here is Jerry Nowicki from Capitol News Illinois, and we're glad you're here, Jerry.
Glad to be here, Hannah.
Well, the Governor J.B. Pritzker is out of town. Not even out of town. He's out of the country. He's on another continent. He is in London and Glasgow, Scotland, this week for the COP26 climate change UN conference. And he's making a couple days stop in London beforehand to try to tempt electric vehicle manufacturers and other kind of green energy companies to come to Illinois with a package of tax incentives that lawmakers passed last week. Now, the governor has not signed that yet, but obviously he will. He's indicated he will. I'm sure there'll be a big signing ceremony too. But Jerry, let's talk about this tax incentive package. This was something that lawmakers put together in pretty short order after the governor signed the big energy and climate change bill that lawmakers had labored over all summer and passed in September. And of course, that piece of legislation has a goal of putting 1 million electric vehicles on Illinois' roads in the next decade or so. And beginning next summer, Illinoisans can have $4,000 tax credits. That's on top of a federal tax credit for buying new electric vehicles. But that's not all lawmakers want to do. They want Illinois to be a hub for electric vehicle and other related manufacturing, right?
Right. So former Senator Andy Manar, who's now a deputy governor with Pritzker's office, he said, we care about having electric vehicles on the roads, but we also care where the parts come from. So this isn't just for electrical vehicle manufacturers, it's for companies who make the batteries and whatnot. And the incentives are essentially they get a credit for the income tax withheld for new jobs or retained jobs. I think it's anywhere from 50 to 100%. There are a number of factors that would vary that. And there's also credits for, I think, a 10% credit for training fees that go into training the workers for these programs or functions, whatever. And the thinking is that, you have a trained workforce, you have a skilled workforce in Illinois, a good community college system, and you can sort of target the programs to really be able to manufacture and build these things and make them more, get past that sort of publicity that you need to just get people to understand that electric vehicles are here and it's not a bad idea to invest in one.
Right. And Dave, we have already electric vehicle manufacturer Rivian, who set up shop in Normal in the old Mitsubishi plant. We remember the kind of debacle from the Rauner days about, the former governor saying that he couldn't, pay someone to take up that manufacturing plant after Mitsubishi had left it. Then we also have Lion Electric, which is, I think, a Canadian-based bus company that wants to build buses and trucks in, I believe, Joliet, and that was an announcement from earlier this year. And there's another company that's up in Belvedere that I believe is going to start making some sort of electric vehicles in the near future. And we also have this other company called EV Box, which makes the charging components. It's not just electric vehicles, and it's not like you can just go to any old gas station, obviously, when you're driving your fancy new Tesla or Rivian on the roads. And so they make that's an example of, what Jerry was talking about, the related companies. But, do you think that Illinois is well set up what are the advantages to that the governor is trying to pitch?
Well, California has Silicon Valley. Illinois, especially downstate, it's going to be Electric Avenue. And the governor talks about the infrastructure and the workforce and transportation, et cetera. And I think all of the jobs and such that are coming to Rivian, there's a lot of brain power available in Bloomington Normal to work on batteries. He's trying to get the battery plant to come here. And, it sounds promising. Will it be as good as it sounds? Maybe. Rivian seems to be, doing the correct things to get its product to market. They're seem to be going pretty fast.
And Dave, of course, organized labor is hugely influential in Illinois. Almost nothing passes the legislature without labor signing off on it. And, the tax credit portion of the legislation definitely received almost universal support. But some, business groups were, as they, often are, honestly, split on what organized labor had, gotten into the bill. So the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, which definitely takes a more hardline approach, was upset about the labor neutrality position. Basically means that recipients of the tax credits for the electric vehicle manufacturing won't oppose unionization efforts from their employees. And the Illinois Manufacturers Association, which is a group that's definitely always more ready to make a deal, they, were fine with that. But definitely labor still getting their piece of the pie here, right, Dave?
It is Illinois. And, the chamber, when are they going to be happy about stuff and take an optimistic view? Probably not today.
Jerry, any thoughts there?
I think, yeah, the labor, it's just sort of the situation in Illinois, as Dave said. But also, I think one of the interesting things on the floor was that the Republicans were supportive of the tax incentives, but they also said, the governor earlier this year had, or whatever it was last year, had sort of nixed the Blue Collar Jobs Act, which they came to an agreement to with the Republicans, that contains similar tax incentives, and he called them corporate tax loopholes or whatever, is the messaging he used. And a lot of the conversation on the floor said, we'll support this. This is a good idea, but it was also a good idea when we did it in the Blue Collar Jobs Act. So there's a lot of distrust there with the governor, I think, on the Republican side of the aisle. And it was just interesting to see how the governor is touting this, which is essentially the same type of tax credit that he nixed as a loophole earlier this year.
Oh, that's 100% correct. There was a lot of riffing on the floor from House Minority Leader Jim Durkin, who was kind of ribbing the Democratic sponsor of the bill, saying, so when is a tax incentive, and when is it a corporate loophole? And Durkin answered his own question by saying, well, you make a tax incentive a corporate loophole when, you get the governor mad at you. And so, Republicans were basically saying, this is great. It sounds a little familiar. It's almost as if you took the entire framework from that Blue Collar Jobs Act, which, by the way, the governor gladly signed and even took credit for during his first term in 2019. And, it's always interesting to see the waves of change, and, that there's still some question about, what the entire tax package that the governor was threatening to, nix and delay, what will eventually happen with that. I'm not sure that we ever settled fully that whole thing, because kind of moved on after lame duck session and, got into regular session. And there's obviously been so many things that have happened since then. But, Dave, the governor taking this first international trip, going to a large global climate conference, pitching, Illinois. Is this also, though, an opportunity to get him on the national and international stage?
Yeah, it sounds like it's the kind of thing that maybe he would have done a year or two ago if it weren't for the pandemic. It sounds like exactly the kind of thing that he ought to attend to introduce all these other nations to Illinois and tell them what we're all about. It'll be interesting to, hear from him after it's over, what he thinks he accomplished and what he did by going there instead of being on a Zoom like you and I are from a couple of miles away.
Sure. And, I think we've all learned from 20 plus months of this that it's always more effective to be in person. But, some have been wondering if the governor is positioning himself to run for possibly president in 2024, maybe 2028. But we'll see how his stock rises, assuming, if he is reelected next November and what he might do with that platform afterward. But I'd like to move on. Unfortunately, we are still in a pandemic. Breaking news for anyone who wasn't aware. But the governor a couple weeks ago, Jerry, he indicated that, or he didn't just indicate, he flat out said he would like to remove mask mandates for public spaces before the holidays. But earlier this week, before he got on the plane to the UK, he said, actually, maybe not so fast. COVID, especially new hospitalizations for COVID, have definitely flatlined. Other metrics that you and I have been following have flatlined. What does this mean for, the future of his pandemic control and, the restlessness that has built up because of that?
Yeah, so the thing about the governor, as you know as well as anyone, is he speaks in long sort of soliloquies in that he just goes on and on. And the by the holidays thing seemed to be something that he just came up with as he was standing there when I was listening to that press conference. It wasn't like this is going to happen type thing. But the interesting thing is, when he was watching the data at that time, it was on that downward trend that we've seen in the past. In the summer, the positivity rate got down to somewhere near 0.5%, and there were fewer than 100 people in ICU beds. So he probably saw a trajectory that looks similar to that. But what we've seen this month is that we've flattened around, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's far above those. I think around 300 people in ICU beds statewide. So, and a positivity rate around 2%. So we're not seeing the decline. It's getting colder and we're going inside. Obviously, there's more room for the viral load to be higher when you're unmasked and indoors and the heat is on and all that. So, it's just, it's been impossible to predict anything more than a couple of weeks out in this pandemic. And even that's been difficult. So I don't know, the whole mask mandate thing, it doesn't make sense to go that far ahead.
I think this whole time in the pandemic, we thought it's going to end by now. It's going to end by such and such. And then Delta comes in, or for whatever other reason, there's an increase. And I don't think the governor is serving anyone really by making these remarks. And because it becomes the headline, the governor says, well, lift it by the holidays. Or if he doesn't, because some reporters do like to pin him down on that, governor refuses to commit to lift mask mandate. It's going to go where it's going to go. People need to be careful. If people don't believe in, the so-called preventive measures, or if they don't believe in the COVID, then, they'll do what they're going to do. But we've seen that we can't predict an end to this. We're not at an end now. And predicting when it'll end is a fool's errand. And certainly none of the three of us are fools. And I don't think the governor wants to be one either.
Sure. I was just looking at the governor has indicated that the metric that is most reliable, and honestly, I agree, because we've seen the number of tests fluctuate a lot, especially in the summer, definitely a lot lower. And then coming into the fall, when you had schools and some companies adopt testing mandates, you see that number higher. So the number that's probably most consistent and reliable is the number of new people with COVID or a COVID-like illness entering the hospital each day. And, we saw that number get pretty darn low, below 50 each day in, late June, early July. And then we saw that go up to, I'm looking at my charts that I keep, over 200 in, end of August when Delta really peaked, we would say, but we have not gotten down to even, half of that. And it's definitely a lot higher than we were in that trough of summer before Delta really took over. And so, but, the one thing that I think the governor probably should do, which he has refused to do from the beginning of, in August when he indicated that we were going to have mask mandates back and, school, vaccine mandates and all that, is that he just has not given any metrics for most of the pandemic. Ordinary citizens, journalists, whoever could follow along the stats and we could know, all right, we are this far from the metric when this would happen, remember phase 3, phase 4, phase 5, and then the tiers of mitigations within phase 4 before we got to phase 5. Now we're in phase 5, which is supposed to be a unrestricted kind of place. And it's true, we don't have any, capacity restrictions anymore or any of that, but there are no mandates for people to look at and say, all right, we're getting better. And then, kind of without a goal, I wonder if that's taken away any motivation. Do you think so, Dave?
I guess I'll just refer to what I said earlier. There's no way to predict when we're going to hit any metric, or if we go down, it'll bounce back up again. I'm reminded by of a comedic commercial. I forget what they were selling, but everyone in the company was gathered around the TV at what was obviously supposed to be CNBC, and the CEO is on there with a real dumb look on his face, saying, "Yeah, we can do that by the end of the year." And the whole company watching him on TV was just agog. I'm done predicting things. Can't predict sports, can't predict politics, can't predict COVID. And who knows, maybe there are other variations out there, aren't there, that, begin with E or F or something like that? Who knows if they'll be in to ruin Christmas.
Oh, God. Well, that's fair. But Jerry, one thing we do know is that kids are starting to finally get vaccinated for COVID, those between 5 and 11 who had to wait months, after maybe their older siblings had gotten vaccinated. Tell us what you know about the vaccine rollout so far.
Yeah, the messaging from the governor's office from IDPH is call your pediatrician now, see if they're going to have it, call your schools, get them to set something up in terms of clinic. Obviously that would be optional. You're not going to force the kids in there to get their vaccine, but for the parents that want it. So it's really a proactive, you start making these calls, you start making it known that this is something sought after and wanted, it'll be quicker. It'll help us control the spread faster and whatever. I know my nieces and nephew are have their vaccine appointments already. My sister lives in the Chicago suburbs and she's got them lined up. So the appointments are out there. Best place to start is your pediatrician.
Okay. And, one thing that we talked about on the show last week was the lawmakers, really the governor's effort to amend the state's decades-old Healthcare Right of Conscience Act. And just as a reminder, it was a 1978 law that was originally written to shield, Catholic hospitals and, doctors who had religious convictions from being forced to perform abortions. And some creative lawyering in the last few months has, made it into a, I guess, compelling to some judges argument that folks who, had religious objections to the COVID vaccine didn't have to take that, but not only that, didn't have to submit to COVID testing, or, even in some cases, there's an argument that they shouldn't have to wear masks. And so, Dave, we've already seen, like we talked about in the show last week, we've seen this wave of litigation, and the fear was that there'd be more. And the legislature, or Democrats in the legislature, failed to get enough votes to actually, make the law have an immediate effective date. And so we don't know yet whether Democrats will try again in January. But in the meantime, we've already seen, some more decisions on lawsuits. For example, North Shore University Health Systems on Friday afternoon, the day after lawmakers left town, they ruled in favor of some personnel who wanted to use the Healthcare Right of Conscience Act to say, no, we don't need to, we can't be fired for refusing to comply with that vaccine mandate. We've seen some other mixed judicial rulings to vaccine mandates lately too, right, Dave?
Yeah, and I think the short story on this is lawmakers are trying to go back to this 1977-ish law and say, no, that's not what we meant. We didn't mean COVID. The COVID wasn't invented yet. And the opposition is saying you can't legislate that way. You can't go back and reopen it and say, oh, you can't say we didn't mean that. So, the only grounds you need are a lawyer who will take the case. So I think we're going to continue to see challenges and judge shopping and all manner of that until it's over. By the way, when's it going to be over? What do you predict?
Like you said, not making predictions.
Nope.
Yeah. And Jerry, we've got 5 minutes left, and I'd like to move on to our final topic here today. The governor on Monday declared gun violence in Illinois a public health crisis. He signed an executive order that will make it possible for the state to spend an additional $250 million in gun violence prevention over the next 3 years. That's on top of more than $500 million the state is spending this year in this year's state budget, although that's propped up a little bit by federal money. So Jerry, what did the governor say? What is this in reaction to? We've definitely seen a lot of legislation this year on violence prevention, criminal justice reform. So what is this piece of the pie?
Yeah, the order and the funding is sort of to propagate the Reimagined Public Safety Act, which passed earlier this year, signed into law earlier this year. And it's sort of a early intervention type thing. Per the law, there's an Office of Violence Prevention at the Department of Human Services, and they have to define the most violent areas in the Chicago area. I think there's like 17 of them, and then 10 or 15 across the rest of the state that have the most per capita shooting crimes. And they are essentially going to start up like early intervention programs to where you're trying to give the youth a way out of being put into that violence ecosystem, sort of, and crisis reaction funding and stuff like that. So there's $50 million in this year's budget for that. And then the governor said he'd try to work with lawmakers to get $100 million each of the next 2 years for it. So I think that would still have to come through General Assembly at this point. But it's just sort of an extension of the new look lawmakers are trying to take at public safety, lawmakers in the Democratic Party, that is.
And Dave, it was interesting while lawmakers were debating that bill Jerry was referring to on the floor last week, Republicans in the Senate, they were willing, for the most part, to vote for it because, there's not necessarily anything to vote against, in terms of, sure, we should spend more money on, to be clear, these things are a bit separate. I don't want to necessarily pin the spending money on Republicans' vote, but Republicans have also lately kind of come across this new what's old is new strategy on, a way that they can tie Democrats to an increase in violence ahead of next year's election. And so Senate Republicans were willing to vote the bill. Republicans in the House, however, voted pretty much uniformly against it. So where do we think, Republicans are not going to let up on this strategy? Do you think it's going to work for them in weakening Democrats' position ahead of 2022?
Well, I think that's a long, Republican point. The Democrats are soft on crime, and here's an attempt for the Democrats to try to bat that away. But, the headlines keep getting bolder, both in Chicago and downstate. Places like Champaign, Decatur, Springfield having their share of the most violent crime. I'm sure we haven't heard the last of it between now and Election Day. The primary, by the way, is going to be in late June.
We don't know what's going to happen between now and then. Obviously, we hope for more peaceful times ahead, but we just don't know. But we're almost out of time. I'd like to thank our guests, Dave Dahl, Jerry Nowicki. I'm Hannah Meisel. Please join us again next time on Capitol View.